Welcome to Inside Israel, everyone. I'm Joel Chasnoff coming to you from Ra'anana. It is the week of October 8th, 2025. This is episode 102 of Inside Israel, entitled Yom Kippur Bike Sale, which I think is an intriguing title, and I'll get to that in a minute. First, I want to tell you a bit about the flow of this episode. It's a little bit different. I'm going to begin with questions related to last week's episode that was called The Case for Destroying Gaza City. And many of you wrote in with questions related to that. A lot of those questions were very similar, so I'm going to lump them together and address them as a whole. But I do want to get to that. And although it wasn't my intention when drawing up the notes for this episode, in light of all the news that's breaking here in Israel right now and around the world as well, it behooves me to talk about this possible ceasefire that's about to be implemented. I mean, we're all hoping, praying that it actually comes to fruition. Nothing is final until it's absolutely final. And even then, you have to wait to make sure everything is implemented on the schedule it is. But right now, we are looking at a potential ceasefire that would have all of the hostages released and back in Israel by the end of the Sukkot holiday. So I have to address that as well. And I do want to speak a little bit about the attack on the synagogue in Manchester in the UK, because that deserves some attention too. And then we'll get to the main episode topic, beginning with some of the questions you wrote in, because the questions you have, although it's on last week's episode, they very much relate to the topic we're discussing today. First, though, some front matter. A big toda rabah. Thank you to everyone who's contributed to the Inside Israel fundraiser. This is the last week. I'm going to mention it after this. I will say no more. I've given it 4 weeks. I feel like if you've given already, really, toda rabah, thank you so much. The podcast does depend on you, so I appreciate your giving. And a lot of you have stepped up in a big way. The gifts maybe I expected, but also a few $500 gifts, gifts of $1,000 or more. And I shouldn't call them gifts. They really are contributions to help the podcast run. So thank you for that. If you still would like to give and haven't yet, you can do that simplest way, joelchasnoff.com. Right there on the homepage, scroll down a bit, you'll see a button where you can click to contribute. Also, I'm leaving for tour tonight, just a few hours after I record this podcast. I'm headed out to Ben Gurion Airport, flying to the US and Canada for just over 6 weeks. And if you're wondering where I'm going to be, you can see the schedule at joelchasnoff.com/shows. I would love to meet up with you on the road and exchange a few words with you, hear what you think of the podcast, what keeps you listening, what you'd change, any feedback you have, and most of all, just to meet you in person. So check out the tour schedule, and I do hope to meet up on the road with you. I'm going to literally be all over North America. So Florida, Texas, Illinois, the Midwest, Ohio, New York, New Jersey, of course, California, New Mexico, and a lot of places in between. So hopefully I'll meet up with a lot of you on the road. And now, on to the main topic of this week's episode. So, like I said, actually, before we get to the main topic, like I said, I want to talk about some of the big news here in Israel. Let's talk about this potential ceasefire. You can read about the details in most media sources. The bottom line is this ceasefire would allow IDF troops to stay in Gaza even after all hostages, living and dead, have been released. So in that sense, if this ceasefire is implemented the way it's laid out according to the Trump plan, it would be a victory for Israel in the sense that IDF troops would still be in Gaza, securing the safety of Israel and Israelis, even without Hamas having its main bargaining chip, the hostages. And you would have to ask, why would Hamas give up the hostages? And all I can say is that they feel at this point, they must feel like they have no other choice. And as you know, I have been a very big critic of Bibi and his government up until this point. But at the same time, I want to be fair and give credit where credit is due. And it does seem like the continuous pounding we have placed on Gaza, destroying 90% of Gaza in general and beginning to take over Gaza City and destroying parts of Gaza City, it has worked. It has shown Hamas that we mean business. It has gotten so bad that most people on the street now in Gaza no longer support Hamas. And we have sent that message that I talked about last week, which is that the message is as important as the action you take, meaning we have sent the message that you cannot mess with Israel, and that if you do, we will strike you back exponentially harder. Not just proportional response as everyone wants us to, but proportionally, perhaps disproportionately, exponentially harder, which is what you need to do in the Middle East to show that you mean business. This is what I referred to as, quote, badass Israel. And that actually relates to the first question that we had coming in this week. The first question was, and again, this is a version of a question that many of you asked, so I'm just going to sort of word the best version of it. Basically, it was along the lines of, Joel, now that you have put forth all the good arguments for destroying Gaza City, what are the arguments against destroying it? Where, as you may recall, my arguments for destroying Gaza City, even though I didn't necessarily agree with them, the arguments for doing that were, number one, to send that message that you do not mess with Israel, and that if you should, we will retaliate exponentially harder and humiliate you in the process. Number two, to remove the immediate threat of Hamas and the tunnels and the weaponry. And number three, to remove the long-term threat. Even if that means killing innocent civilians now, these are innocent civilians who would become Hamas operatives later on. Again, I made clear that I don't agree with that personally, but that was the argument. So one of the questions that came in is, what are the arguments against destroying Gaza City all out? And there really are three reasons why one would not want to do that. Number one, endangering the hostages. It's been a fear all along that if we destroy Gaza City with our full power and capacity, we would endanger the lives of the 22 remaining hostages who are still alive. Perhaps the number is 20, perhaps the number is 19. We don't know right now. But in any case, we're certain that they're being held in or near Gaza City, if for no other reason than to act as human shields against the IDF. So number one, don't destroy Gaza City because you don't want to endanger the lives of those hostages who are being held there. Reason number two, it needlessly endangers Israeli soldiers. Gaza City is the one place where we know that Hamas is still concentrated. Putting our soldiers there leads to a higher probability of more injuries and deaths among IDF soldiers. And so given the amount of progress we've made, there's no reason to risk more lives of our soldiers. And number three, it elongates the war unnecessarily. The feeling in the military for a while is that we have put enough pressure on Hamas to get the hostages out and still have Gaza remain not a threat to Israel. That's been the feeling for a while among many higher ups in the military, including the chief of staff, Zamir. And along with that feeling was the feeling that continuing the war had political motives, that it was the only way for Bibi to stay in power. So those were the three reasons not to destroy Gaza City. And at the end of the day, what we are seeing is that it turns out it does look like the IDF will not be destroying Gaza City in total. It could be that the threat and destroying even a little bit was enough to send that message. Remember that all-important message. It was enough to send the message to Hamas, we are prepared to destroy all of Gaza City. And once they got that message, lo and behold, it does look like we are going to have a ceasefire. Again, I told you last week I did not think the ceasefire would happen. I have changed my tune a little bit. It looks very, very promising. The mood right now in Israel is very optimistic. But at the same time, Nothing here is final until it's absolutely final. Until that last hostage is home, back on Israeli soil, we cannot say that anything is final. And if Hamas should launch even one missile at us after that, believe me, the IDF would be able to resume fighting once again. So our second question is from Elias, and he asked, is bringing back badass Israel worth the price of losing all our allies in the world, except one? And he's talking about the US, and he puts in parentheses, and that one ally rests on, how can I put this politely, a very mercurial president. Do you believe Israel can thrive with no diplomatic friends in the world? So I would actually counter you, Elias, and I've said this a few times. I think all the anti-Israel hate that we're seeing right now, as painful as it is, I think there's also an element of trend to it. I think in 2 years, if this ceasefire does go through, I think in 2 years, I won't say this will all be forgotten, but I do think a lot of the energy behind the anti-Israel protests, it will have moved on to some other cause. And most people, the silent majority, do not hate Israel. Most people see what Hamas is. Most people, certainly in Europe, are seeing the problem of Arabs in their own country. They're seeing that problem grow. And although you're not seeing them out in the streets the way you see the anti-Israel haters, I do think there is that large mass of these populations that is very frightened of what is happening to their countries. And that brings us to the second big news story of the week, which was the attack on the synagogue in the UK. I think as shocking as that attack was on Yom Kippur, the synagogue in Manchester, was anyone really surprised? Did anyone think this would not happen eventually? When governments start supporting the idea of a Palestinian state, even as Hamas is holding hostages, do we not think that that just gives fuel, that gives permission to harm Jews at their place of worship on the holiest day of our year? When Jews post "not in my name" and post how they as Jews are against the war in Gaza and against Israel, should we not be surprised when others see that as permission to act violently against Jews around the world? If there's any surprise here, it's that it took so long, that it hadn't happened until now. I really hope there aren't more attacks like this one, but I also wouldn't be surprised if there are more. God forbid. But we're living in a climate right now where all this anti-Israel hate on an official level from the governments does seem to give permission to people to carry out these attacks. But at the same time, to answer Elias's question, I don't think Israel is going to lose allies. I think the direction, we have to think of the long arc of history and the direction of the world. Many places in the world are realizing, and they will realize, that Israel is on the right side of this fight, and the trendiness of hating Israel will dissipate. I do believe that. It's hard to feel that right now. But 2, 5, 10 years down the road, if Gaza can be rebuilt, Hamas can be demilitarized, and this conflict in our rearview mirror, I don't think that same energy for the anti-Israel hatred will be there. And this segment of the population, first of all, they will have grown up, and the younger ones will have found a new trend, because there is an element of trend to it. I now want to go on to what I said was the main topic of this week's episode, which is Yom Kippur in Israel. And I called this episode Yom Kippur Bike Sale. You know, many holidays, Jewish holidays, are different when they're celebrated in Israel. I think that goes without saying. Those of you who've been in Israel know that even Shabbat has a very different vibe in Israel than it does anywhere else, because the whole country really does come to rest. Jerusalem shuts down almost completely. Even here in Ra'anana, the streets get quiet around 2, 3 in the afternoon. There's no traffic out. So holidays have a different feel here in Israel. And yet, of all the holidays, to me, the one that is most different is Yom Kippur. And if you've never been in Israel on Yom Kippur, I highly urge you to do so because it really shows you just what happens when Jews get a country of our own and how holidays morph into something that was never intended and yet might be beautiful or might not be. I'm going to address that part of the question as well. What I want to do now is shed light on three aspects of Yom Kippur here in Israel. Number one, like the title of this podcast suggests, Yom Kippur is a bike holiday here in Israel. There's no law, but by national agreement, nobody in Israel drives on Yom Kippur. And I mean nobody. The streets are completely empty. Not just the streets, the side streets, or the main streets in towns, but the highways everywhere in the country are completely desolate, abandoned. No one is driving. So what happens? It's become a bike holiday for kids. Kids starting with sunset. Once Yom Kippur officially begins, you'll see the streets flooded with hundreds, thousands of bikes, kids on skateboards, kids on scooters, also some adults as well. You know, there are adults who are serious bikers who look forward to Yom Kippur because it's the day that they can get on their road bike and safely ride from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv and back with, no traffic at all on Highway 1. It's really an amazing sight to see. And stores start gearing up for Yom Kippur about 2 weeks to a month beforehand with Yom Kippur bike sales, and families bring in their bikes to have them oiled and greased and cleaned up and the brakes checked. So that whole period leading up to Yom Kippur is also a preparation for a bike holiday. So the first thing that you notice in Israel on Yom Kippur that's really different is that it's a bicycle holiday, and it's just so striking. I remember the first time I experienced it myself on Yom Kippur here. I mean, I was blown away. When I was a kid growing up, it was very much like what Yom Kippur is in your communities now. The rest of the world, non-Jewish America, goes on with their lives as normal. But for us, it was a day of atonement. We drove to synagogue, spent all day in synagogue from 9 a.m. till 2 in the afternoon, then came back for Ne'ilah. We were fasting. It was not a pleasant day by any means. Here, most kids do not fast. Many secular Israelis do not fast or go to synagogue at all. It's just a day off from everything else. And a lot of them celebrate it or commemorate the holiday by bike riding. So that's the first thing you notice about what's different about Yom Kippur in Israel. Number two, it's a very social holiday. Yom Kippur is a day when people hang out with each other outside, especially at night. I would say almost primarily at night on Erev Yom Kippur. The Erev Yom Kippur service is about 2.5 hours long. So after that service lets out, everyone, I'm speaking for Ra'anana right now, but just about everyone flocks to Achuza, which is the main street in Ra'anana. And people go on long walks up and down the street. Of course, bikes are on one side and people are on the other side walking. There's a big hangout at Yad Labanim, which is the main sort of town square. I mean, flooded with people. And we're talking about packed in like sardines, back to back, walking and talking. It's a very social holiday. And this is for the religious Jews who go to synagogue as well as the secular. So people come out of synagogue with their, dressed in white, with their kippot on, and they're hanging out with friends at Yad Labanim or on Achuza Street. It's just, where are you going to be after services? And people say, I'll meet you at Yad Labanim, and everyone's hanging out. It's a very social holiday in that respect. And again, very surprising, because for me growing up, Yom Kippur was not fun in any way. It was dreary. It was dreadful. So the idea of, hey, it's a chance to hang out with friends and catch up with people I haven't seen in a long time. That was not how I thought of Yom Kippur. But here it's a very social day for adults as well. Now, number three, the third aspect I want to bring up is this a good thing? Is this a good thing that Yom Kippur has morphed into a bike holiday? When I first moved to Israel, I thought it was super cool. It was like, yeah, This is Judaism 2.0. This is what happens when you don't need Judaism to feel like you belong, right? Because that's one of the big reasons why I went to synagogue when I lived in the States with my wife and kids. We'd go to find community, to remind ourselves of who we are. And we had Shabbat dinner every Friday night to remind ourselves of who we are. So I thought, hey, this is cool. Riding your bike is what you do on Yom Kippur when you no longer have to feel like a minority among the Gentiles of the world. It's what you do when you no longer need religious tradition and law to keep you Jewish. It's what happens when you live in a country that's so Jewish that you don't need reminders. Simply speaking in Hebrew and spending the shekel, which is the currency of the Bible, and having Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah and Hanukkah as days off on the school calendar. That's what happens. You can go bike riding. You've evolved past all that old school religious stuff. And that was really how I felt during my first few years here, that it was cool. This is the next iteration of Judaism when we don't have to be scared of being a minority and we can get a country of our own and be in charge of ourselves. But here's the thing. In recent years, I've begun to feel differently about it. I think 40 years ago, it was very rare for an Israeli to leave Israel. They might leave for a year or two, and if they did leave, they had a special name for them, Yordim. The same way Olim means to move to Israel, to go up, Yordim means to go down, to leave Israel. And there's that element of insult to that term, Yordim. Israelis have always left Israel, but it wasn't that easy to do. It wasn't that popular. And so I think it was sort of assumed that, like, if you were born and raised in Israel, you were probably going to stay in Israel. And so that model worked for you of riding your bike on Yom Kippur because you were always going to stay in Israel and you were always going to remember that you were Jewish. But in recent years, it's become much more common for Israelis to leave Israel permanently. The world of high tech has opened up jobs for them, certainly all over the world, but especially in Silicon Valley and in the US. It's much easier for them to get visas and to move. There's more marriage between Israelis and non-Israelis, so they can get green cards and citizenship in other countries. And if you've grown up in Israel for, let's say, 25 years, where Yom Kippur is a bike holiday, and then you move to Palo Alto, where Yom Kippur is not a bike holiday, but where it's a Jewish holiday, and the only way it's going to be a Jewish holiday is if you make it Jewish. If you've grown up your whole life riding your bike on Yom Kippur, there's a chance that Yom Kippur will mean nothing to you at all. So I'm not so sure that it's a good thing. Not anymore. I don't think it's as cool as I used to think it was. I think it still does represent the next iteration of Judaism. It is what happens when Jews get a country of their own. We don't need the religion. We don't rely on the ritual to remind us of who we are. But again, if you're able to leave the country and live somewhere else, you are going to need ritual. You are going to need holidays and tradition and law. And if all Yom Kippur means to you is going on a bike ride and meeting friends, then there's a very strong chance you're not going to end up passing that Judaism, the Judaism we need, on to your kids. I do want to talk about this more in a future upcoming episode because someone asked me a question related to this about how my Judaism has changed living here versus living in the US. There are definitely things I would do differently if I could go back 9 years to when we moved here. And so this biking and social aspect of Yom Kippur, which makes it really a day to look forward to. I mean, I fasted, I went to synagogue, but I still looked forward to the day because it had this element of differentness and fun, and it was invigorating seeing the kids out, especially after the 2 years we've been through. But I don't think it's as cool as I used to think it was. And I'm not sure it's what Judaism needs in order to continue into the future, because this model works as long as you stay in Israel. But once you leave, it turns out that all you have is like a house of cards, which will completely collapse. So that is Yom Kippur in Israel. I really, of all the holidays that are different, I really believe Yom Kippur is the most different from how it's commemorated elsewhere. If you've never been over Yom Kippur, I highly encourage you to come because it's just so different. And it really does open your eyes to what it means to not only be Jewish in a Jewish country, but to be Israeli. Because Israelis should not be confused with Jews who live in Israel. Those are two separate things. The Israeli mentality, the psychology of the Israeli is very different from Jews elsewhere. We take pride in different things and we relate to being Jewish in different ways. And as good a description as I can give it here, you can't really understand Israeliness until you experience it yourself. And Yom Kippur here in Israel is one of the best ways to do so. And good news, El Al won't be the only game in town very soon, right? If this ceasefire happens, another small asterisk benefit is that we can start flying United and Delta and American, Lufthansa, and all the other normally priced airlines instead of El Al. So no reason not to come visit us next Yom Kippur, just a year from now. That's it for today's episode. It's a rather short one, but it's because I am out the door in literally a few hours to Ben Gurion Airport to take off for my fall 2025 tour. Again, if you want to see me on tour, check out joelchasnoff.com/shows and let me know ahead of time that you plan to be at one. If you want to contact me, give feedback, ask a question, the best place through the website. You can email me or sign up for the Hebrew is Magic newsletter. And again, this announcement is the final one about the Fall 25 fundraiser for the podcast. If you want to give and haven't yet, joelchasnoff.com, just scroll down on the homepage and click the button. To those of you who have given already, I sincerely thank you. You are helping the podcast to continue. Next week's live episode is going to be Sunday, October 12th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. We are going back to the tour schedule. When I'm on tour, we usually do these live broadcasts in the evening because I'm on Central or Eastern Time. Next live broadcast, mark your calendars, October 12th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. I will see you then. Until then, Besorot Tovot, right? Good news, good tidings for all of us. There's a chance that the next time I speak to you, the hostages will be out and back in Israel. May that happen. I know we are all praying for that. Amen. Amen. Lehitraot until then, everyone. Toda rabah.